Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and we're continuing our series on the fundamentals of marksmanship. In this video, we're going to talk about stance. If you're just jumping in, this is the second video we've done on the topic of the fundamentals of marksmanship. The first video we did on grip. You may ask why I'm breaking them up. Well, because they each do their own degree of attention, and I didn't want the video to be excessively long, and I also wanted to kind of segment it up so if you only wanted to use one specific video to show someone, to help them, or just to make it easier to find the information you're looking for, or the philosophy you're looking for, it would make it easier than having to go through a video where I covered all of them. So that's why we're doing it in a segmented series. This one we're going to be talking about stance. Now, just as a recap, the fundamentals is we're going to be talking about them throughout this series: grip, stance, sight picture, sight alignment, breathing, trigger, recoil control, and follow through. Stance has always been a whipping boy of mine. When I was first taught, stance was very important to shooting. If you look at any of the fundamentals of marksmanship out there, stance is invariably going to be in there because it's important. We need stability in our body. Once we've got stability in our grip, we can compromise that by not having stability in our body. And this is something that's perfectly understood. However, outside of formal academy or basic training type training, extended training, if you will, weeks, months, reteaching someone's stance is extremely problematic. I teach classes that are on average 16 to 32 to 48 hours, depending on the topic. If I focus on a student's stance, what I have to keep in mind is they've been walking since they're about 12 to 15 months old. If they come to me and there's a problem with their stance, I'm not necessarily going to be able to fix it in those 16, 32, 48 hours. Of course, that's no different than anything else. If you come to a firearms class an OK shooter, you are going to leave an OK shooter because what you've gotten is training. What you haven't gotten is practice on the training you received, which is where proficiency and efficiency is actually going to come from. Now, I am certainly not the pinnacle of knowledge when it comes to cat-like movement and athleticism on my feet. I've been described as a three-legged cat. I'm gonna get there kind of quick, but it's not necessarily the most graceful thing a person has ever witnessed. And I'm kind of okay with that. I've accepted my lot in life because, again, stance goes a lot back to range of motion, what kind of exercise you do, your physical fitness level, and as well as just any kind of pre-existing conditions, injuries. You start to collect these things as you get older. Regardless, unless you live a very, very sedentary lifestyle, you may not have any injuries that are going to preclude you or prevent you from being agile, but that sedentary lifestyle is going to have its own effects on your ability to generate explosive power or something like that. But that's more talking about the stance as it applies to movement. Just talking about stance itself. What are we looking at doing? Well, we're looking at creating stability in the body. There are some, what I like to call topical, low-level, low-fruit advice out there about stance. And some people will say stance is the most important part of shooting, and I would kind of disagree with that. If I have balance, I can shoot well. Stance isn't necessarily part of that. You can see people who can balance perfectly well, and this is an extreme example, on one foot. That's not necessarily the best position or the position I would choose to shoot from. However, if they have balance in that position, they can shoot well. They might not be able to shoot fast, and they might not be able to generate movement quickly, but they're going to be able to shoot well because they are inherently stable in that isolated position. Stance is one of those things that I don't really address in classes unless, and it's on an individual level. If I see a student who's having problems with their mobility, or they're just not quite understanding something, and that's when I'm going to address them individually. I'm not going to teach the whole class at a basic level like, hey, your feet need to be this far apart, because humans have balance that's precognitive. If you try to push somebody over, they don't have to take a conscious thought to kind of correct that so they don't fall over. Your equilibrium is there for that, your sense of balance, your spatial awareness, all these other factors go into it. So when it comes to just a static stance shooting position, it can be corrected on a individual level. And sometimes you'll see people stand with their feet necessarily too close together. However, if they're not shooting well, that might be part of the problem, but it's probably not going to be the largest issue they're having. Unless, of course, the recoil of the firearm is creating issues, say with a rifle or a shotgun or something like that. So at that level, it does need to be addressed. My philosophy on stance is this: can you generate explosive movement from your position if you have to? And when I say explosive movement, I don't mean, again, I don't want to get all tactical Timmy about this, but are you able to set and move efficiently from the position you choose to be in? the answer is yes, then your stance is probably pretty good. If you have problems coming up to speed, if you have to move from one position to another, then you might want to rethink and think about working on the efficiency of that. And there's some great instructors out there that teach competitive movement classes, teaching you just how to move in an athletic way, which is important, not obviously important to competition because these are time-based things, but it's kind of important to life and general wellness to be able to do things as efficiently as possible. Get in the argument where, I don't have time for that, or that's not something that interests me because I want to take this class where we get to, shoot machine guns, or we get to do combat roles, or whatever. But we're talking about the fundamentals, and stance is definitely one of those. Stability needs to be modular. If I'm shooting standing, I need to be just as efficient as if I'm taking a kneeling position or I'm going to a prone position. I see this in handgun classes sometimes when we talk about kneeling, and it comes up more, and it's very troubling to me when it comes up as often as it does sometimes. I ask, what is a primary reason we might kneel? And I'm going to get a few common answers, but one of them I hear is to increase stability. No, it actually doesn't. Not on the handgun anyway. It may lower your base and arguably give you a smaller profile to your threat. However, it does nothing to increase stability on the gun because this shooting position is just the same as I go down to a kneeling position. So I don't know where that came from, but I feel like at some point somebody was trying to come up with a bullet point dissertation, if you will, of why this position is useful. And they're like, oh, it's more stable. With a rifle, potentially, if I get another point of contact using, the inside of, or the edge of my tricep on the inside of my thigh or something like that to gain support, or if I'm bracing off of an object or cover, okay, I'll give you the increased stability there. But with a handgun, kind of a hard sell to say stability comes from that kneeling position. Stance also factors into any physical position you're going to shoot in. Seating, kneeling, prone, laying on your side, laying on your back. Stance is all part of these. What we want to do is use our appendages as well as we can to create some degree of stability, not necessarily for the firearm, again, depends on the type of the firearm, but for our body itself to be able to react to the situation as it's developed and prime us for movement if movement needs to take place. A long-held opinion of mine is if you want to improve your stance, sports, and outside of sports, competition shooting. And I don't just mean IDPA or IPSC or something like that. If you're more rifle-oriented than handgun-oriented, you can get into PRS or 3-gun or something like that, and you'll find that by being forced to move in a rapid manner, you're going to retrain your body into how it introduces stability quickly into positions and changes of positions. So if I have to run from point A to point B because it's a timed event, I got to go from this box to that box, or this piece of cover or simulated cover to that piece of simulated cover to get my hits, I'm going to intuitively develop ways to slow myself down faster and generate speed faster on my takeoff. That's part of stance, it's part of movement. And this is something that I've recommended to people, and I get eyebrows about it, but it's definitely very efficient. Some people do it secretly because they feel like it's going to make them less of a man or something. If you get into some kind of training, maybe you've heard of it, it's called yoga. It increases your range of motion and mobility. Now, that is something I would recommend to somebody who doesn't otherwise do competition shooting or any kind of sports or athleticism, something like that. If you just go to the gym, pick up heavy stuff, set heavy stuff down, or maybe you only go to the gym on a holiday, yoga is going to increase your range of motion, and it's going to give you a greater dexterity and efficiency in the stance that you choose to take in the way that you're shooting. If you're too ashamed to go to yoga for whatever reason, which that's a thing. Some people feel like that's just for girls. And of course, the video, and I'm sure there's a minority, but I'm sure there are females watching this video who can kind of shake their head and agree with it. That flexibility is going to give you increased efficiency and increased precision, which are two things that we definitely want in shooting. Now, I don't make it to yoga as much as I would like to, but it is something I will partake in because it does give me a greater sense of body. And when I don't mean that in like some kind of esoteric way, what I mean is I have a greater awareness of my efficiency, and that gives me a greater awareness of my stance and what I am and am not capable of. One of the worst things to see is someone who doesn't have a conscious knowledge of their efficiency in moving from a standing to a prone position attempt it for the first time. And you see rifles and pistols too used as crutches to get down and to get back up, and that's just a lack of understanding of the physical techniques that have to take place, or lacking the ability to think through an atypical problem. Maybe there's something that's preventing you from using an efficient method of going down, getting back up, going to a kneeling, standing, something like that. So there are things that you can do to increase your stance and your efficiency. Again, it comes down to how much time am I going to willing to put in this, and how seriously am I going to take it? And these are topics that come up sometimes. People say, like, well, you know, that's just too much work. And maybe it is. Maybe your life you just don't have that kind of type, or maybe you just can't prioritize this type of stuff for your brand of shooting. And that's okay, because, you know, I'm going to drive the bus of knowledge, and I'll stop and open the door, but I can't actually make anybody get on. And that's fine. But if stance is something that you consider to be critical to marksmanship, then have you actually paid stance its own isolated attention and attempted to improve it? Or do you just say that because it's on the list? I'm Aaron Campbell, Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.